It worked.
It worked. Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
This, this is awesome.
Okay. We had to do some Googling.
We did have to do some Googling, but we got it sorted out in the end. And I suppose that's all that matters, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
All right.
Well,
Well,
I was gonna suggest I come to your house because you were talking about all your cool paintings
I
in the
know.
background. So
Yeah. So,
what were you saying because when I got on, you were in the middle of it.
okay. So, yeah, I was ad-libbing. We had to take one, everybody, which did not work. So now we're doing take two, which is working. So this right here is Snarf. He's the main character in books one and two, and he will be in book three. And my friend Rebecca painted him for me. And
Mm.
then over here, if we pan slowly, this this is Eden over here, and she's a really big character in book two. She's barely in book one. She has like the tiniest, babiest little cameo that you would hardly even notice. But in book two and in book three, she's all over the place. Well, she will be whenever I write book three.
Yeah. Which I'm excited because I loved Eden in book
Oh,
two.
good.
But we're getting it.
Okay.
Did you just get those recently?
Kayla got them for me for Christmas a year or two ago,
Oh,
I
okay.
want to say, and they were in my office and now they are here in my
Okay.
house.
Well, I haven't seen them yet. So awesome. Do you want me to introduce who I am?
Yes, please. I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah, go ahead. Tell everybody who you are. Everybody, all two of us.
Oh, that's okay. I am Christina Varvel, and Luke and I have been friends for a few years now. And your wife Kayla is one of my best friends, and you are very close to my husband Brett. And I guess I'm kind of an author. I don't really
Kind
call
of. You
myself.
definitely are.
I wrote a book
Yes,
and
you did.
about what published self-published it a year and a half ago.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's where you and I have had a lot in common. And I was thinking about how whenever we get together for dinner, family dinners, and you and I inevitably start talking about writing and what's next and what are you doing and how's this going and how are your sales and here's a marketing tip since I know nothing about marketing. You do all that stuff and I just listen. And Luke or I think Kayla and Brett and they just kind of tune out. Wow. And
They
so
do.
I'm excited that we get to do something a little more formal here.
Yeah, me
When
too.
it comes to our love for words and writing and all the things. So I guess that's a little bit about me.
I
And
love
so the
it.
rest of it is about you. Um, I want to first just ask before we get to the books, how did you become a writer? Did
Hmm.
you have you always had this passion? Did you wake up one day and be like, oh, I think that I want to write a
Yeah,
book? How did that
yeah.
be?
That's a great question. So for me, it really started probably first grade, second grade. It was Christmas, and normally my Christmases were G.I. Joe guys. And I went downstairs. This was in the early 90s, and I went downstairs to my stocking, and in my stocking, there were no G.I. Joes. There was this weird, hairy creature, and this golden yellow guy, and this blue and white trash can, and I had no idea what any of it was about. And I started opening my presents, and there wasn't a GI Joe in sight. It was all all this weird stuff. Um, and then I opened these movies. It was this boxed set, three VHS tapes of Star Wars. And that night, while all the adults were having their, adult Christmas time, I was the only boy cousin on both
Oh,
sides. So I
wow.
had nobody to play with. So it was just me. So I took those VHS tapes downstairs and I put in Star Wars A New Hope, and I laid there and proceeded to have my mind blown. absolutely blown. I still remember sprinting up the stairs afterwards, begging my parents if I could watch the second one. And they said no, I had to go to bed. But I was there first thing in the morning watching that second one. And fast forward a whole bunch of years in high school, I did a bunch of video stuff. That's when I fell in love with video. And I pursued that through all of high school, did a bunch of stuff. And then college came. I went to the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, and I was going to be a movie director. That's what I was going to do. And this was in the early 2000s at this point. And the way the school works there, 4-year bachelor program, and the first 2 years, you do everything. So you hold a microphone and you write scripts and you light stuff and you produce and you do everything to sort of see what you like and what you don't like. And then your second year, you sort of enter this competition phase where you pick the thing you want to do the most. And for me, that was directing. And then at the last minute, I was like, man, there were just some things about it that didn't make any sense. I didn't really connect with any of the teachers. Um, and also, whatever movie you owned, the school gave you a budget, which was great to make your movie. Most students in film school have to wander around begging their parents and everybody for money on top of already paying for college. And so the school actually gives you a little budget to make your movie and a lot of the equipment and stuff. But as a consequence, the school owns your movie. And
Mm.
so I was like, I don't really know, you know. So I switched to screenwriting. Um, and I loved it. Then I graduated. We made a movie that just it was a really good movie. We won some significant film festivals, but we just couldn't get distribution for it. I got kind of jaded, and I was sitting in the library one day,
Mm.
writing this fantasy screenplay thing, and I just had this moment where I was like, this is really dumb. I'm writing this screenplay that in all likelihood no one is ever going to produce.
Mm.
And I can't do anything with it. Nobody sits around reading screenplays. Um, and so I was like, what if I tried writing it as a novel? And, and so I tried that for a good long while and failed, um, just because it was too big for my britches. I wasn't experienced enough. I just still don't think I'm experienced enough for that. Is too many characters, too many places, all that stuff. Um, and so, anywho, I was like, I need to do something simpler. And I'd always enjoyed westerns, but I'd never really like loved them. But I thought a western would be a good idea, so that's what I switched to.
Um, so what are you ever going to go back to that fantasy book, you think?
I hope so.
Yeah. Okay.
I really do hope so. I really do hope so. I've plundered though so many ideas from it, and sort of transformed them to fit into the Western. The
Yes.
fantasy thing had a character in it who was a pacifist and who didn't fight, and I've brought that into the Western and things like that. So it's one of those things where it's kind of fun. I've sort of drained a little from that well, and now I've got to refill it at some point. But yes, hopefully after book 3, maybe we'll do the
We'll do
fantasy
the
thing. Maybe we'll do something else. I
that
don't
that would
know.
be good. Well, and I found with writing that, when you said like who's ever going to read this, and I have so many different writings that nobody will probably ever read,
Yeah.
or I might later, like you said, use it, or even just in the writing process, you are growing and learning
Oh
and
yeah.
those ideas and so forth. And so it's almost like, God used that even experience to now push you to where you're at
Oh,
today.
for sure. Yeah, you got to put in those 10,000 hours,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So where I mean that you kind of starting with the fantasy, and then you just thought of like the western. So you said that you've liked westerns, you didn't really love them. So like where do you get where did you come up with the idea and even the story? Like
Okay.
were you just sitting there and it came to you, or just you had to do a lot of research? Like how do you go about that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Um, so the inception of the idea which inception does not mean a thing inside of a thing, which people usually think that's what it
Well, when
means. Uh,
you watch a movie, isn't that what that means?
no, inception means you the beginning, you
Mm.
plant the idea,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So the inception was I just had this idea of I like things. I was chatting with a friend the other day about something, and she was like, this isn't very politically correct. And I said, I'm the kind of guy who the very moment someone says that isn't politically correct, we are about to do that thing.
Yes. Yes, you are.
and so what happened was I had this idea for an Indian who called himself Redskin. I didn't know why. And I
Mm.
had the idea that he was a Christian. And I had the idea that he would, Indians in Westerns are always they're always such the violent characters. Usually they're the bad guys.
Mm.
So I had the idea that he was a Christian and that he wasn't violent and that he was going to try. He was so tempted to violence, though, that he would sweat blood when he was tempted because he had to do violence to rescue a little kid who he had sort of come to take care of. And I had no idea why any of that was happening, but I had that
Mm.
character.
Mm.
And I had that idea, and I didn't know where it fit. And so originally, when I first started working on it, I adore True Grit, the book and the movie. I like the Coen brothers one, and I adore that. And so originally, it had a female hero, I just kept playing around with it. And then I found this book by this guy Will Wright, and he wrote this book called Six Guns in Society, and he wrote it, I think, in the '70s, and he had studied all these westerns, oodles of them he'd watched to try and figure out what is a western, what makes the genre what it is. In a romance movie, right? The couple has to run to each other at some point and kiss, right? And so the question is, what are those conventions for a western? And this guy had sort of broken all those conventions down. And so I was able to take that book and to take these ideas that I had and put them on top of each other. And that's when the story finally started to work. Because before then, it didn't
Yeah.
work. There were some parts that were interesting. There were some parts that were funny. There were some good ideas. But, I would give it to my wife to read, and she'd read it and she'd be like, oh, wow, that's nice. And it's like, that is not at all,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
And
know,
then
I wasn't going for that's nice. And so that's finally what let the first book, Spirit Walker, really start to work
mm,
was the discovery of Will Wright's book, Six Guns in Society, which
mm,
is a pretty interesting book.
good. Good. Um, so I don't have your second one with me.
That's okay.
I have your first one with me. Um, but so this is the first one you did, Spirit Walker, and with obviously the two books, you and with as I wrote my book, right, and this was something that you would talk to me about as I'm writing, like, who's your target audience, right? Like, sometimes we think that we have this idea and it's for everyone. Everyone needs to read this, which, yes, everybody should read your book. But because there's so much noise out there,
Yeah.
right? And there's so many, wanting our attention and so forth. And so if you had to pick an audience of who you're really trying to win the hearts of in your story, who would that
Mhm.
be?
Yeah. So specifically, I wrote these books thinking about young men.
Hmm.
Young men today are, I think, generally in big trouble
Hmm.
for a variety of reasons. Our culture right now is telling them to be quiet and go away, and they're useless, and they don't want any of their skills and all of that. And as well as on top of that, you've got video games, and you've got pornography, and you've got these things that are just eating away at their souls. And so I wanted to write books for them to try and help them um, figure out how to live. That's really what stories do. Stories, let's say you've got a difficult situation in your life and you're sort of mulling it over and over and over and over again in your head, right? Well, probably what you're doing is you're telling yourself a story, you know, and you're sort of thinking, you create a little character of yourself, and you're like, all right, if I go in there and I just give
Now
them a
you're
piece of my mind, what will they do? Oh, they'll do this and that and the other thing, right?
oh yes.
And yeah, and so that's what we do. We tell ourselves stories to figure things out. And so I wanted to try and tell some stories for young men to try and give them generally some ways to think about how to live and how to be and how to follow Christ. And I wanted to try and do that without being obnoxious and preachy. Which is, or another way to say that would be C.S. Lewis talks about this idea of sneaking past the sleeping dragons. In other words, all of us have in us um, this dragon that's ready to sort of rear up and attack whenever somebody sort of pokes at how we're supposed to live or who we're supposed to be, or we're doing something wrong, or we need
Right.
Christ. This thing kind of rears up, and so his objective was, he said he wanted to write stories that could sneak past that dragon. In other words, you wouldn't really realize you were being told anything or
Oh,
taught anything,
yeah.
right? You wouldn't realize it. You'd just be living your life, and then all of a sudden one day you'd go, wait a minute, that's that thing.
Yeah.
And it was really fun. I was actually, some time ago, I was chatting with a friend at work, and she told me that she really liked Chronicles of Narnia, which surprised me. Just it surprised me. And I said, because she's not a follower of Christ at all, and I said, well, Aslan is just Jesus. And she just sat there, and I could see her mind just exploding, you know. But that's
Yeah.
the idea: is you
Yeah.
tell a story
Yes.
that someone falls in love with. They fall in
Yeah.
love with these characters, and then later on, they all of a sudden they have this moment where they realize, oh wait, I loved Aslan, and Aslan is just Jesus. And suddenly, perhaps this person to whom they were quite antagonistic, suddenly they're
Mm.
like, oh, wait, but I used to love him when I was a child.
Mm.
Maybe I should reevaluate.
Wow.
And so, that's, and some of that is obviously like pie in the sky, but that's what I'm trying to do.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know if I've achieved that. That's up to the people who read the book,
You
but
read it.
that's what I'm going for.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So who do you have a favorite character?
Oh
Like
my.
we're starting to talk about characters and how we can like relate
Yeah.
to or
Yeah.
see, and then we start making sense of it. So do you have, if you
Yeah.
had one of your favorite characters?
Oh my stars. I love almost all of them so much. That's a really,
Oh, you
I
can't
know, I
say that. I,
won't. I won't. I'll give you a more specific answer. But it was interesting. There was writing book two. There was this moment where one of the things I think you have to do in a good story is I think you've got to beat the living daylights out of your characters. Otherwise, what are you watching? You know, like I wish I was rich. So I go out and I buy a lottery ticket and I
yeah.
win. Nobody cares.
No. No.
Like you got to beat the living daylights out of these people. And so I was writing book two, and I had just beat the living daylights out of these people. And it was funny. Nobody else was in the house. And I just had this like weep fest, it was really weird. It was like something terrible had happened to me.
Yeah.
I've never experienced anything like that before or since. And but let me see. If I had to pick, okay, um, gracious. I think I would pick Snarf, the main character,
Mm-hmm.
as my favorite. You know, main characters in this kind of story, a story that's trying to be like Star Wars or like Lord of the Rings, that main character has to be a little bit vanilla so that everybody can love the person.
Yeah.
All the side characters get to have the fun quirks and all that sort of a thing. But excuse me, I think that Snarf is kind of just me in some ways. And I talked earlier about trying to think things through, and that's what I'm doing with Snarf. Is I'm really trying to think through my own life
Mhm.
with him in his life, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense. And yeah, and trying to figure some things out and make sense of the world that I live in. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, and that was like my next question was, do you see yourself in that character? And you kind of answered that.
Oh,
And,
definitely.
we write what we know, right? And so um, even putting yourself in all the characters, so to
Hmm.
speak. And if I can brag a little bit about your book, do I have
Okay.
permission to
You
about your
can,
book?
okay.
um, that was one of the when I put I read the first one, and then after the second one, and I put it down, and it was the characters were so relatable,
Mm,
and
mm,
that I could literally see
mm,
myself in some way in every character,
mhm,
and
mm,
without, I guess, giving too much away, but you have those that are the spirit walkers, right? They're
yeah,
walking in the spirit,
right.
and just you had said Redskin being a Christian and the spirit walker and so forth, but how he still wrestled with his past,
Yeah,
right? Like in the flesh, and you're like, oh, I get that,
yeah.
and then even seeing Snarf and the things that he wrestles with, and he's human,
Mm,
like he's the hero,
mm,
but he's you watch the Marvel movies
mm,
and the DC, and I love that you're, because that's what a lot of young men are going to, right?
yeah.
They because I have three boys now, and I see that. I see, like, one of our sons, he's obsessed with Goliath right now. And he goes around wanting to be Goliath, and I'm like, of all the characters, why are we Goliath, right? And because you boys, like, you want that, and you want to be the hero. Although
Yeah.
obviously Goliath is not the hero in the story, but he's 2.5, so let's give him
Right.
some grace, right? And he wants to be brave. He has a sword. Everything is a sword right now.
Hmm.
And I think this. Max is very
Yeah.
similar. And they want to be heroes, and so
Hmm.
we put out all this DC Marvel stuff, and it's like you sit there and you're like, that's not really relatable.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have these superhero or human strength, and so when I put your book down, I was like, okay, I can't be Wonder Woman. Come on. People say that, but let's be honest, right? There's nobody
Right, right,
who's
right.
there's no one who is She-Hulk,
Yeah.
and our society's like, be a Wonder Woman, be a She-Hulk, And but I could put your book down and be like, wow, I could be like
Mm,
Snarf, who wrestles
mm,
with the flesh and the spirit, and this is how you can walk and figure out life. And so I say that what
mm.
you were trying to get across, it
Oh,
did work. And
good.
I'm even a woman. And so it works. We're not just
Well, I think we're
you
more alike than different,
yeah,
but we are different.
yeah, we are different.
Yeah.
Exactly. We wrestle with those things. And so
Mm,
I just loved how in all of your characters it was, even in the villain.
mm,
We all have that sin nature, and I'm like,
yeah.
ooh, I can see myself in that too,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
praising the Lord for saving me from that, and who I could
Right.
be as a
Yeah.
villain, and how to wrestle through the stuff, and even the backdrop of the Western, because
Mm,
I was never I grew up with a sister. I did not have brothers Westerns were something that we did not watch. And but like your book, I was like thrown in it, and like it was so relatable with the backdrop of a completely different time period that I have no idea about, and it's
Right.
still very, very relatable. So
Thank you.
It works.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, it's, the Wild West, um, the our brothers and sisters in Europe, they have knights and things like that. And the Wild West, that's where our knights are, and that's why I put the story in the Old West, is because it is mythological, and myths are stories that are, um, the characters in them are fairly broad because they're sort of stand-ins for us and our situations and the things that we're dealing with. Myths are how we made sense of the world. Um, we told these big stories of heroes and all of this, and you made a good point about the Marvel stuff, and I like many of the Marvel movies. I think I've seen them all once. They're fun, sort of like roller coasters. But you know, I my favorite stories, are the stories that are about something. And every time I watch a Marvel movie, I walk away just a little bit disappointed because I'm not quite sure what they're about.
Yeah.
My favorite one is the first Thor, which usually surprises people because it's not many people's favorite, but it was the one that I felt was closest to being about something. It's about him dealing with pride and learning to be humble, and he can't pick up the hammer because he's arrogant. And it's probably no mistake that the film was directed by Kenneth Branagh, who got his start doing Shakespeare. So he knows what he's doing. And I think that, so I've been trying to think a lot about what are the Marvel movies about, because whenever you tell a story, um, you're either telling it about something on purpose or on accident.
Yep.
And every once in a while, yeah, every once in a while, the story that you're telling, you actually send a wrong message inadvertently.
Yeah.
And so the Marvel movies are about something, and I think there's a little bit of what you brought up, and this is my theory, is I think that in probably a way that the makers of the Marvel movies don't intend, I think the Marvel movies are kind of a defense of oligarchy. Oligarchy is a government, ruled over by special people. So we've heard a lot of talk lately about Russian oligarchs. These super rich Russian oil people who've made all this bajillions of dollars, and they sort of run the country. I mean, Putin runs the country, but anyway, you know what I mean. That's the point.
Yeah.
Is that there's this group of people who have super something, and they're in charge, right? So super brains or super whatever. And what do the ordinary people in a Marvel movie do? They scream while they get crushed by aliens.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
And so that's, as an ordinary person, that's all the heroism available to you in that world, is to scream and be crushed.
Yes.
That's it. Whereas, contrast that with, the Lord of the Rings, and the entire point of that story is that the little people, the most powerless people, have the most significant impact in the world. And Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas, for all their strength and all their heroism going out there to fight Sauron, if Frodo and Sam don't walk up a hill, none of it matters.
Yes.
And I think that's important for all of us. We need more stories like that, where the ordinary people do ordinary things.
Yes.
Because that is how you save the world. You don't save the world being Spider-Man. You
No.
save the world by having babies and doing your job, and that's how you save the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And changing diapers.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
All day long. Yes. So what then because as we're talking about that, there is something you're trying to say.
Yeah.
We have a message, and like you
Hmm.
said, even if you think you don't or not, right? With
Yeah.
whatever everybody puts out there, there is a message, there
Mhm.
is a theme, and so forth. So, what would you say is your main, if you can talk about them,
Yeah.
what are your main themes or the main messages that you're trying to get
Hmm.
across that your readers would take away from your books?
That's a great question. Um, the the obvious thing that I'm wrestling with um, is violence, right? We talked about the Marvel movies, and half the universe, quite literally, is killed in the Marvel movies. So, violence just permeates those things, and the Western as a genre is just packed with violence, shootouts, and all of this kind of a thing, and it has been, and it has received numerous critiques for that violence. And so I felt like it was the setting is a good opportunity to have a conversation about violence. And so that's one of the things. So I mentioned, this idea of a pacifist. And so in the first book, Spirit Walker, the main character Snarf falls in with this Indian who calls himself Redskin, and Redskin is a pacifist and teaches Snarf about this way of being, while at the same time Snarf, he wants to be like the sheriff, the cool guy.
Yep.
DC is his name. He wants to be like him, who's just a gun toting, shoot him
Mm-hmm.
up kind of dude. And and it's funny, I read a number of books. The Way of the Lion and The Way of the Lamb. And there's another book by a guy, Preston Sprinkle, which is a hilarious name. But he wrote a book about sort of a biblical view of pacifism. And I read those while I was writing book one. And I was like all in, man.
Yep.
I was like totally convinced. And like I said, trying to think with these characters.
Yeah.
And so then what you do is then in book two, you kind of go, all right, you think pacifism is the way, try this on for size. Now what are you going to do?
Yeah.
How are you going to stop this
Yeah.
guy? You know?
Yes.
Um, and it's interesting. I don't know. I genuinely don't know if Snarf makes in book two the quote unquote right choices, but I think he makes the choices that he would make in those
Mm-hmm.
situations. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's about violence, and then I think underneath the theme of violence, there's just this talk of what does true faith look like. Um, and it's interesting, I try and think about one of my mentors. He's not a real person; he's old and dead. But I read his books about writing, and he talks about that writing. When you read a book, the point is that it should be like a vivid and lucid dream. So those are the best books. You can't put them down. That's how we
Yes.
describe them. I just couldn't stop reading. It was a
Yeah.
page turner. And so you're just sucked into this thing and you can't stop. And I try and think about that while I'm writing. That okay, this should be a dream, right? Well, dreams, sometimes they mean things. Carl Jung was really into that idea that dreams mean things, and I don't know how true that is all the time. But
Right.
but in the Bible, people have dreams that are quite meaningful, and so there's this idea that things happen in your dreams that you do not understand, but maybe one day you will. And so, sorry, this is long-winded. But there's a character in all three of the books. Her name is Easter, and she's this elderly lady in the town, and she's a church lady, I would say. She's sort of inside of Christendom, we may call her legalistic. Um, and I've been thinking a lot about her as I'm getting ready for book three, and just what does this character mean? Why does she exist? Why is she in these stories? I don't really know, other than I love Mark Twain, and he liked poking fun at Aunt whatever her name was, and Tom Sawyer and stuff like that, who was all sort of fakey religious, and here's your castor oil for disobedience and all that, and but I figured it out, and it's that Christianity is a profoundly romantic religion. And I don't mean by that it's lovey-dovey. I mean romantic in the old sense, in the Knights of the Round Table sense, that it's Christianity is, you know, um, Christianity is profoundly about hoping when things are hopeless, about fighting when you have lost, about continuing to stand when no one around you is standing. We see this all through the Bible, and I think that that's part of what James is getting to in his letter when he talks about true religion is this, to love the orphans and widows. Well, what a more hopeless cause than orphans and widows, right? But that's what the whole thing is about. It's about carrying on when there is no reason to carry on. Again, going back to Lord of the Rings, that's what you see. And so I think that's the sort of deeper, that's the thing that I'm trying to sneak past the sleeping dragons, right? Is this idea that real faith, this stuff is real, um, and souls really are at stake, which is why violence is such a big deal, and why, as a sheriff, you just can't go around shooting the bad guy, because that has eternal consequences, and that's on the back of book one. There's that little quote. It says, a man can pull a trigger in a second, but what happens after goes on forever. And that's kind of the whole point, is just how are we supposed to live? How are we supposed to do this stuff? What are the consequences of our actions? And we, as followers of Christ, we have a high call to live in a certain way. And when we lose that romantic view, when we think that following Christ is just about do this, don't do that, this, that, and the other, it falls apart. Apart.
Yes. Yes. And I can definitely attest to that with your books, that you have hope in it, and you have the gospel throughout it, even though you're not like putting out the Roman road.
Right.
And even with those characters, and I love in book 2 what you do with Easter, and she has to come face head on with, wait, I think my legalistic ways aren't going to really work anymore.
Right.
And you definitely play that out of there is a lot of sitting back and thinking like, wow, what would I do in that situation? And it definitely comes across, and I think that's good. That's awesome. So what this is really good. We can wrap this up here soon.
Sure.
But I would assume that someone would have to read the first one, right?
Yeah.
Before the second one. Yes.
Yeah. It's definitely, like Star Wars, like Lord of the Rings, some of those kinds of things are not standalone, bad guy in town this week, you know what I mean? They're one after the other. Yeah. You really got to read the first one, which is called Spirit Walker. Yeah.
That's the one I have here. And you've mentioned, you kind of kept saying the third. So there will be more?
There will be a third, and I don't have any more after the third. You know what I mean? The third is the end of the trilogy. I don't have any ideas post that, the third one, and there's a little hint about the third one in the back of the second book. I put the cover art because I've already got that done and things like that. So I'm excited for the third one.
Yeah.
I got to write it though first before I can read it.
I finished the second one and I was already like, let's go, Luke. Come on.
I'm sorry. It's going to be a minute. We just had a baby over here. It's going to be a minute.
Bye. Tell Kayla she's fine. I'm kidding.
That's right.
She can just go to my house and it's chaos. No, that's awesome. Is there anything else you want to add before we get to where people can buy the book? Is there any kind of last like, hey,
No,
no,
I don't
no, I
think so. I've
you did
talked
awesome.
sufficiently.
Yes, you. I feel like we gave a really good overview of what someone can get out of these books, and again, I can throw my 2 cents in that even though your main audience is young men, I think a lot of people can get something and a lot of things out
Thank,
of your
thank
stories.
you.
It really is brilliant. Like Brett and I, like we were reading, we're like, wait, this is Luke. Like this is our friend. Like it's brilliant. So
Thank you.
yeah, we've definitely enjoyed it. So so where can people buy your books?
So the easiest thing is to go to my website, www.lmhelm.com, or you can look me up on Facebook. I'm on there as well. Um, if you don't want to do any of that, you can try just going to your favorite online, bookseller, whether that's Amazon, Barnes and Noble, whatever, um, and searching for the titles. The first book is Fleshwalker. Second book is Spirit Walker. Nope, the other way around. First book is Spirit Walker. Second book is Fleshwalker. Don't worry, I wrote these. I promise. And they, you may have to add my author name just because I'm not
Uh-huh.
fancy enough yet for Amazon just to find me
Pop
based
up.
off the title. You know what I mean? But my website, lmhelm.com.
Okay. And what formats can people
Oh,
get?
that's a great question. So, book one is in everything. So, audiobook, paperback, hardback, large print, ebook,
Nice.
all of them. Book two, I just don't have the audiobook done. So, it's in large print, it's in paperback, it's in hardback, it's in ebook, it's in all the things. Yeah,
And
yep. Ebook, audiobook coming later.
okay. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Totally. That is awesome. So, well, thank you, Luke,
Oh,
for taking the time to share.
my
And
pleasure.
yeah, best of luck to you and can't wait for the third one.
Thank you so much, Christina. Bye bye.
All right. Bye.